welcome to Digging in the Doom, Episode 1. This is a podcast I have wanted to do for a very long time, but I've been looking for an excuse to do it, and luckily 2023, it's provided me with the golden excuses of all excuses. Because see, in just a couple weeks from now, Dennis Culver, Chris Burnham, and an amazing art team behind them is bringing back Doom Patrol to DC Comics proper. Something that hasn't been done in a long time. The last proper Doom Patrol series with, of course, the incredible, amazing Gerard Way, Nick Darrington run, part of Young Animal, a run I hold near and dear to my heart, not only some of my favorite creatives of all time, but just some incredible stories and incredible moments that really helped change my view of comics, my view of life in some ways, helped make some of the best friends I've ever had. Just all around, an incredible moment in comics. So I'm very, very excited that in just a few weeks, we get new Doom Patrol. For a long time, like I mentioned earlier, I've wanted to do this podcast. The entire point of this podcast originally was going to be going through every era of the Doom Patrol, some highlights, some lowlights, and everything in between. But the more and more I researched it, the more and more I dived deep into a team I already loved, the more I found out that, much like Doom Patrol themselves, sometimes the most interesting things about these characters isn't the action, isn't the grandiose moments, isn't the craziness, but learning about the characters themselves, and in this case, learning about the creators behind Doom Patrol. I think what a lot of people don't realize is from the very beginning, Doom Patrol was set up to be this just weird, unique book that stands not only by itself in some of the topics they tackle, some of the action that happens, but just in the way in which it was created, in the way in which it was manifested and continued to be brought back, to be canceled, to be rejuvenated, resurrected, part of the proper DC universe, part of Vertigo, part of this weird in-between world, all the way up to, of course, Young Animal, to them just popping up here and there, and not to mention the effect Doom Patrol has had on the world of comics in such a big way, with a lot of people not even realizing it, and of course culminating in things like the TV show now on HBO Max, one of the, I think, best superhero shows ever made. Now, of course, it's also wrapping up pretty soon, but 4 seasons is 4 great seasons I will take over 20 mundane seasons any day of the week. I'm much like Doom Patrol itself in the comics, I think it's kind of cool that the show will have a definitive beginning, middle, end, and be its own era as well. I mentioned earlier that I truly believe Doom Patrol to be one of, if not the greatest team book ever made. And of course, that starts with the very beginning, My Greatest Adventure, number 80, coming out in June 1963. Again, this is where I planned on beginning this podcast of talking about the book, the stories, but something that is almost more interesting than the stories of Doom Patrol, especially this early era, are the creators. Because a lot of people don't talk about who created Doom Patrol. Even some of the greatest fans of the characters, the series, the different eras, won't tell you who did what. So, of course, we got to start giving credit where credit is due. Arnold Drake, Bob Haney, and Bruno Premiani. I may butcher names. So, if anyone out there is just screaming about how I say a name, pronounce a name, I do. Sorry. Again, these are names clearly I have only ever read for the most part and read interviews of. Maybe have seen some stuff here and there of other people saying their names, but haven't heard their names many times because, again, for whatever reason, in the modern era, they don't get talked about a lot, which is crazy because the fascinating details of all of their lives is insane. Arnold Drake, on top of all 3 of these, created a ton of comic icons. Arnold Drake being a great example of, on top of being a co-creator of Doom Patrol, obviously, and being the person who kind of helped pitch it and helped really get off the ground, also co-created Deadman, Guardians of the Galaxy. Over in X-Men, created Havoc and Polaris. You have Bob Haney, who co-created Teen Titans and Super Sons, going back to Bruno Premiani, the other co-creator of Teen Titans. Of course, you had Beast Boy debut in their era of Doom Patrol, so you already had those connections. You keep having weird connections with these characters. Arnold Drake was a journalist who studied journalism at NYU and University of Missouri. Eventually, he went to, eventually, he was able to help contribute to what would be considered one of the first graphic novels in existence, Rhymes with Lust, a book that, again, in the comics world has such importance of just its creation. It Rhymes with Lust being, again, one of those first graphic novels, something that you don't think about in the modern era of like, oh yeah, this had to be created at some point. And when you think of creation, for whatever reason, in the 60s, it doesn't seem like, on one hand, it seems forever ago, and on one hand, it seems like, in the grand scheme of the earth, not that long ago at all. So again, you have Arnold Drake contributing to what many consider one of the first graphic novels of all time. And on top of that, you have his brother being neighbors with Bob Kane, which would ultimately result in him working at DC Comics. He wanted Arnold Drake was someone who was trying to break into comics, was trying to break into writing, was throwing pitches everywhere. Eventually, of course, going back to leading to his brother showing Bob Kane his work from It Rhymes with Lust, that getting his gig at DC through that. At the time period, again, this is the 60s, DC saw that the superhero comic book trend was taking over. It wasn't just a trend. It was going to start winning. For a lot of people who don't know their history of comics or don't know a lot, there's pre-superheroes an entire world of comics. That's where My Greatest Adventure comes from. An adventure book. I know it sounds silly to say now, but clearly being an adventure book that was made to read about adventure. DC saw these superhero books taking over the market, so they assigned Arnold Drake with the task of coming up with a pitch to turn My Greatest Adventure into a hero book with holding on to adventure elements. The editor, Murray, I always mess up names, Murray Boltinoff, he was fearing that My Greatest Adventure was close to cancellation. He heard the pitch from Arnold Drake, was thrilled by it. Drake already had, when he made the pitch, had Elastigirl, had Automaton, who would, of course, later on be known as Robot Man. But Bob Haney helped rounding out the team with Negative Man, which, especially in the early books, would kind of become the team's, in a lot of ways, kind of their juggernaut, their backbone, their biggest power, and one of their biggest assets. The original name of the team was going to be the Legion of Strange. It's a rumor that Arnold Drake essentially made the pitch in over a weekend, just a couple of days, to bring it up to them. That's why I think why a lot of books don't necessarily start with the origin of a team, don't necessarily start with how they all came to be. I think that's why Doom Patrol, My Greatest Adventure 80, just literally start with three shadowy figures, and they're introduced one by one via their origin stories. I think part of it is because they were, again, this was up against the wall, just creating to create and creating out of necessity, which sometimes lead to some of the greatest and most long-lasting ideas. So around the same time, going back to Doom Patrol always having a strange aura around it, you had X-Men popping up, which of course got a lot of comparisons because you have these two teams that are, for the time, almost celebrated freaks, celebrated these people who didn't want to be heroes having to become heroes. And although on the surface level, there's some mild similarities of, oh, it's a dude with a wheelchair in charge of some super powered people that the world hates. The two books beyond that could not be more different. I know it is something that people still bring up to this day, is comparing the two. Even early on, early X-Men, early Doom Patrol, shockingly different. Completely different type of tones, completely different types of stories. I think Doom Patrol, from the very beginning, the characters were there. Of course, My Greatest Adventure, you'd have it kind of be more of a run-of-the-mill, not run-of-the-mill in a bad way, but like they would face, reoccurring characters, reoccurring threats, while also doing Monsters of the Week type of moments, because that's just kind of what, again, finding their voices, finding their series. But even then, you could tell in these early issues, you had something special there. My Greatest Adventure, of course, it would run for a few more issues, eventually be coming into the proper Doom Patrol around issue 86. So you would have, again, this long-running story that Doom Patrol was a star of, that eventually became the main crux of that entire series. Something that I think is kind of cool that you had from the very beginning, Doom Patrol crawling from the wreckage of another book and making it their own and making it into something special, making it into something very unique, and something I think a lot of people don't realize the importance of. Because again, I already mentioned the creative teams behind it, but something I haven't really mentioned yet is also the obvious influence of going. So you had the original Doom Patrol run from My Greatest Adventure 80 to That's 1963 all the way to its end in September 1968 as Doom Patrol 121. A decently long run with the creative team basically staying the same, a couple fill-ins here and there, a couple people drop on, drop off, but essentially you have a long run and something that's very different, and starting again from this very first era, ending in such a unique way, something that hadn't happened before. In Doom Patrol issue 121, the book was being canceled. And so how they ended it was the team essentially being killed off to conclude the title. Something that in comics history, this was the first time it happened. A canceled title concluding with the death of the cast. Even though in that same issue you had Bruno Premiani, the artist, and editor Murray Boltinoff appearing in it, literally asking fans to mail in requests to bring the title back, to resurrect it, to bring it. Apparently Arnold Drake was supposed to also be involved, but due to some pay disputes and him maybe sticking up for some workers' rights, even back in the 60s, may have been taken off. And of course, he was also going to Marvel, so there was a lot of controversy how that book ended. But I just kind of want to set the stage. Even from the very beginning, the Doom Patrol was a extremely unique book, an extremely unique idea that would go on to influence so many. Again, even the idea of in DC, it was a unique team to be hated heroes, while you had the Chief essentially just kind of egging them on, giving them different missions. There's even quotes of Arnold Drake essentially saying that the team would just have to deal with these horrible issues, and while they were also dealing with feeling like freaks of nature and feeling like monsters, while you had just had the Chief basically saying, stop grinding your beer, and here's another mission, go do this, go do that. That's, again, a very different setup, especially in DC Comics at the time. There was not really much even kind of similar to that. So, couple early on in this run, you had some really interesting crossovers and some really interesting characters that would set up what would come. You had Brave and the Bold, issue 65, a crossover with The Flash, which kind of set up from the very beginning how different the Doom Patrol are from your run-of-the-mill regular DC Comics heroes and characters. Because even someone like The Flash, this very established character, a very established character that also has some very weird attributes. And we're talking about, again, early on in the Doom Patrol life, how much of them were already formed in many ways of just from the get-go being so different and so weird. Not to the level that would come on later with Morrison, of course, with Palahniuk, with what Way would do, and what I'm kind of guessing Culver's going to do, now we've got a little bit of taste. The weird was always there, but a little bit more subdued. I'm not going to lie to you and say that every young reader will love the kind of Silver Age of Doom Patrol, that everybody would love the My Greatest Adventure era, the early Doom Patrol era. I think there's a lot of fun with those books. I think, of course, My Greatest Adventure 80, I mentioned Brave and the Bold 65, I mentioned Doom Patrol 121. Those three issues kind of spanning a little bit of that era are three ones I would definitely recommend because they still stick out in how different they are from other books from that time frame. Fair warning, some of the vernacular, some of the language, some of everything around it definitely hasn't aged the best. Some of their wording, as with many things, as things change, even when things are ahead of their time has passed and has moved so fast that those themselves are also now behind the wheel of what is either acceptable, normal, or just what we're used to hearing and seeing. Little things from Chief being called an invalid quite a bit. I mentioned earlier the word freak being thrown around a lot. Words like, of course, midget and some other terms that you don't hear very often are 100% throughout those books. Because, again, they were dealing with these characters that the world around them saw them as freaks. They saw themselves as freaks. I think another interesting thing, you have a small team. You have a team of 3 plus a leader. This isn't the Doom Patrol you have everyone. You don't have clearly Jane or Casey, Beast. You have Beast Boy pop up and kind of fill this little role for a while. You have a few other characters that would come and go. Starting with that first My Greatest Adventure, though, on the villain side, you have villains like General Immortus coming from the start, the Brotherhood of Evil you had coming in. These teams that were, again, talking gorillas, brains in jars, immortal and crazy generals. You had all of this just batshit insanity that was bubbling under the surface that you could tell they were trying to get out and that the teams had there, but weren't quite ready to fully explode yet. Now, I know this episode, a lot of just talking about the creation of the Doom Patrol and these early issues, but of course, you got to start from somewhere, so why not start from the start? It's a great place to do it. And I think a lot of people have not gone back to check out these early titles and the early books. And if you're a fan of Doom Patrol, I would highly suggest going back and picking them up. I know whether it be through your local shop, some of the trades they've released, collecting that Silver Age stuff, whether it be on Comixology and being able to pick up that entire run for relatively cheap for single issues. Read these, experience these, get to know them. I know in the upcoming Dennis Culver run, he's been very open about taking ideas and taking moments from every era, from every creator group. And even in the little bit of the 10-page teaser we've already gotten, you can already start to see a lot of those little ideas and influences pop up. Reading back through these issues after that for this show, I was shocked in seeing the similarity in some of the ideas, because Culver from the beginning has talked about wanting this team to kind of be like, or not necessarily wanting, but how Doom Patrol has been turned into almost the first responders of the DC universe, and it's such a unique way for them to be viewed and looked at. Because even here, again, they were, from a meta level, a team created to save a failing book, a team that throughout its history has had these definitive errors over and over again, where you don't really get that in comics. Comics, you have the different errors, but they're always combined with these middle of the road runs. They're always have filler arcs, have this, have that. It's so rare where you can just pinpoint from these are the 60s, this is the 70s, the 80s, 90s to today of who Doom Patrol is. And I'm really hoping throughout this podcast, throughout this series, we'll be able to explore all of that leading up to the new time, the new frame. I just kind of want this to be a little introductory episode. I don't want it to go on too long. Give a little history of the creation of Doom Patrol before we really start diving more and more into it. It's humble but weird beginnings, going into the crazier and crazier time that awaits us. First off, I want to say thank you, everyone, for listening to this, giving this a shot. I know this is kind of different than a lot of what we do. I want to encourage you to hopefully not only read some books that I recommend here, but also stick along this ride and join us, because I think it's going to be a fun one. Let me know your thoughts, your feelings on Doom Patrol, on this episode, on what you're hoping to experience from this series, on what you're hoping to experience in the upcoming Doom Patrol series. Let me know. You can follow me. I'm The Real Jason Way over on Instagram, on Twitter, on pretty much everything. I'm The Real Jason Way. Hit me up on there. If you don't mind, if you like this episode, leave a quick rating and review. It means the world to me and everyone at the network. It helps our episodes get out there, get put on, as everyone knows, get picked up by the dreaded algorithm, get picked up by different playlists, get added to different things. It means a lot to us. If you can leave a review or a rating or a share, please do. Again, it means a ton to us. Until next time, thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for giving me a shot. And we'll see you soon. Peace out. Go read some Doom Patrol.